On a quiet spring morning in the small riverside town of Glenwood, the streets hummed faintly with the routines of ordinary people. Yet beneath that calm exterior, a storm of worry was brewing in the heart of Officer Daniel Cole's family. For Daniel, a 36-year-old patrol officer, with a broad-shouldered frame, a square jaw, piercing blue eyes, and a disciplined but compassionate demeanor forged from both his years in the Marines and his time serving the community, had not returned home the previous night, and his absence was a wound that refused to clot. His wife, Emily Cole, a tall woman with a gentle oval face, fair skin, long chestnut hair often pulled back into a braid, and an air of quiet resilience, stood on the porch of their modest white-painted home, clutching her phone with trembling hands as she called the station for the 5th time, demanding answers while trying to stay composed for the sake of their 10-year-old daughter Lily, a bright-eyed girl with freckles and auburn curls, who sat on the porch steps hugging her knees, her favorite stuffed rabbit pressed tightly against her chest. At the precinct, Sergeant Robert Harris, a grizzled veteran of the force with salt and pepper stubble, deep lines carved into his forehead, and a reputation for stern authority, masking a heart weighed down by the burden of responsibility, paced the floor restlessly as he fielded calls from the family, his gut churning. Because Daniel was not the kind of man to vanish without word. Disciplined, punctual, devoted both to the badge and to his loved ones. So Harris quickly assembled a search unit, determined to retrace the officer's last patrol, which had taken him near the old stone bridge that spanned the roaring Blackwater River, a place known in town folklore as both picturesque and ominous. Among the unit was Coda, a 4-year-old German shepherd, K9, with a sleek, muscular build, a glossy sable coat rippling under the morning sun, amber eyes that gleamed with intelligence and loyalty, and a gait that radiated power balanced by precision, trained from puppyhood to serve beside officers, but especially bonded to Daniel, who had been his handler from day one, feeding him, training him, sheltering him during storms, and whispering quiet reassurances during dangerous raids. And now, as the leash was handed to a temporary officer, Coda's ears twitched, his body tense with the instinctive knowledge that something was gravely wrong. Emily arrived at the station clutching Lily's hand, her tall figure slightly stooped under the weight of fear, her green eyes brimming with unshed tears as she confronted Sergeant Harris, demanding, "Where is my husband?" And Harris, his voice rough with both authority and compassion, explained that the search was underway and they would bring Daniel home, safe or otherwise, while Lily looked up at the hardened sergeant with a child's fragile hope and whispered, "Coda will find Daddy, right?" Words that struck Harris like a dagger because he knew that if Daniel had any chance at all, it rested on that dog's uncanny ability to follow the faintest scent trail across impossible terrain. The unit fanned out toward the bridge, the morning sun casting golden streaks across the riverbank, and as they drew closer, the atmosphere shifted. The cheerful chatter of birds, silenced by the thunderous churn of water beneath the bridge, a place where graffiti scarred the stone supports and discarded beer bottles clinked against rocks, reminders of restless youths who lingered there after dark. But today, the bridge carried a darker energy, as if it were keeping a secret. Coda lowered his nose, sniffing the ground, weaving side to side as he caught a scent that made him pull hard against the leash, his claws scraping at the gravel as he dragged the officer down the embankment toward the shadows beneath the bridge, where the air grew damp and heavy, and there, muffled beneath the crash of the river, came the faintest sound, a stifled groan, weak and desperate, causing the officers to freeze, hands instinctively resting on holsters as their eyes scanned the gloom, and then they saw him, Daniel Cole, tied to one of the thick support beams with coarse ropes cutting into his wrists and ankles, his uniform shirt torn, his face bruised and bloodied, but his eyes burning with defiance, his chest rising shallowly as he tried to cry out again. The unit rushed forward, cutting him free while Coda whined and nuzzled at his chest, and Emily, who had followed behind despite Harris's protests, let out a broken sob as she collapsed against her husband, clutching his face between trembling hands, while Lily clung to his side with her small arms, whispering, "Daddy, I knew you'd come back." Yet as Daniel was lifted carefully toward the ambulance, his cracked lips formed words that chilled everyone present. "It wasn't random. They wanted me to disappear." And the truth behind those words, buried beneath layers of conspiracy and betrayal, would soon unravel into a story far darker and more heartbreaking than anyone in Glenwood could have imagined. A story in which Coda's loyalty and courage would prove the key to exposing a web of corruption hidden in plain sight beneath the bridge. The ambulance's siren wailed as it sped away from the bridge, carrying Officer Daniel Cole, his battered body stretched across the gurney, his wife Emily clasping his hand tightly, while their daughter Lily sat pale and silent beside her. And though relief coursed through them at his survival, dread lingered like a shadow, because Daniel's fragmented words, "They wanted me to disappear," echoed like a sinister warning. And as the paramedics worked to stabilize his shallow breathing and blood pressure, Sergeant Robert Harris remained at the riverbank with the other officers, his eyes scanning the ground where Daniel had been tied, noting the rough grooves in the dirt where boots had shuffled, the cigarette butts crushed nearby, the faint smell of gasoline clinging to the damp air. Details that told him this was not a random assault, but an organized act, carried out with precision, and Harris, a man hardened by 25 years in law enforcement, yet haunted by the memory of his younger brother who had vanished under suspicious circumstances decades ago, clenched his jaw, vowing silently that he would not let this crime slip into the cracks of bureaucracy like so many before it. Meanwhile, Coda paced restlessly near the ropes left behind, his ears pricked forward, his tail rigid, growling low as he sniffed again, and then without warning, he jerked away from his temporary handler, nose pressed to the ground as he followed a trail leading deeper beneath the bridge, where a patch of disturbed earth revealed the corner of a leather wallet, its edges charred as if someone had tried to burn it, but failed, and inside, Harris discovered an ID card belonging to Officer Marcus Hale, a fellow patrolman who had gone missing nearly 2 months earlier without a trace, his case officially listed as unsolved disappearance, though whispers in the precinct hinted at darker possibilities. Harris's stomach tightened as he held the card because Marcus had been young, eager with close-cropped blonde hair, boyish features and an easy laugh. But he had also been outspoken about corruption in local politics, once accusing a councilman of laundering funds meant for public works, and now, standing beneath the bridge with Coda growling at shadows, Harris realized Marcus's fate and Daniel's near murder were linked by more than coincidence. At the hospital, Daniel stirred awake, his cracked lips moving to form his wife's name, and Emily, leaning over him with tears staining her cheeks, hushed him gently, assuring him he was safe. But Daniel's hand squeezed hers with surprising force as he whispered, "Don't trust them. It's inside the department." His voice raspy, yet urgent, and Emily, a woman of quiet strength, who had always supported her husband's dangerous career, despite the constant fear that he might not return, felt her heart twist because she understood the weight of those words. And Lily, clutching her stuffed rabbit, looked between her parents with wide, fearful eyes, sensing truths she was too young to fully grasp. Back at the precinct, Harris convened a private meeting with 2 of his most trusted colleagues. Detective Carla Ruiz, a sharp-minded woman in her early 40s, with a tall, athletic build, olive skin, short black hair styled practically, and an aura of determination sharpened by her years. navigating both sexism and danger in the force, and Officer James Porter, a broad-shouldered man in his 30s with dark skin, clean-shaven face, and calm eyes that often softened when speaking to victims, but hardened when facing criminals, both known for their integrity and loyalty to justice. Harris laid the burned wallet on the table, explaining Coda had found it, and the implications hung heavy in the air as Carla muttered, "If Marcus was here, and Daniel ended up tied beneath the same bridge, someone's cleaning house," while James clenched his fists, saying, "And it's not street thugs. It's someone who knows our patrol routes." Harris agreed grimly, deciding to keep their investigation off the official record, fearing leaks within the department itself. And so late that night, while the precinct slept, Harris unlocked the evidence room, letting Coda sniff articles linked to Marcus's disappearance, and the German Shepherd, loyal, intelligent, and tireless, picked up the trail instantly, pulling them out into the midnight streets, his paws striking sparks from the cracked sidewalks as the team followed him through alleys, across empty lots, and toward the abandoned railyard on the edge of town, a place reeking of rust, oil, and secrecy, where shadows stretched long under flickering floodlights. And there, among the hollow cars and graffiti-stained sheds, Coda barked furiously at a locked metal container, his hackles raised, his amber eyes burning with purpose, and when Harris forced it open with a crowbar, the sickly, sweet stench of decay spilled into the night, making even the hardened officers gag, for inside they found scraps of uniforms, bloodied restraints, and a badge smeared with dried crimson, all belonging to officers who had once walked the same halls as them, now reduced to evidence of betrayal. And Harris, standing in that rail yard with the night wind howling and Coda's growls echoing off the steel walls, knew with chilling certainty that Daniel's survival was not just a miracle, but a message. Whoever orchestrated this had failed once, and they would not hesitate to try again unless he and his team uncovered the truth buried beneath their own ranks. The rail yard discovery spread through the small team like a poison, each of them silently grappling with the horror of what they had unearthed. But Sergeant Robert Harris knew they could not afford to let shock paralyze them, for if Daniel's words at the hospital were true, that the rot was inside the department, then every step they took had to be cloaked in secrecy, every move calculated as if the walls themselves were listening. And so as dawn broke over Glenwood, the rising sun painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink that mocked the darkness of their reality, Harris gathered Detective Carla Ruiz, Officer James Porter, and the ever-vigilant K-9 Coda into a small conference room with blinds drawn, where maps of the town and patrol logs were spread across the table, their tired eyes scanning the paperwork for patterns, while Coda lay at Harris's feet, head raised, ears twitching, restless as if sensing the tension that gripped his human companions. Harris, his weathered face illuminated by a shaft of morning light, traced his finger across the bridge on the map, his voice low and steady, as he said, "Someone knew Daniel's route. Someone knew Marcus would be digging too deep, and someone wanted them silenced beneath the river." And Carla, sharp-eyed and relentless, leaned forward, pointing at a cluster of patrol notes where both Daniel and Marcus had logged complaints about suspicious activity near the old textile factory on the east side of town, a hulking brick building abandoned for over a decade after a fire gutted its interior, yet recently purchased by a shell company with no public record of operations, a fact that raised alarm bells in Carla's seasoned mind, because she had seen this pattern before in organized crime cases. Dead properties brought back to life, not for commerce, but for concealment. James, calm but visibly tense, tapped the files, remarking that the property transfers had been signed off by a notary with close ties to Councilman Victor Grant, a slick politician in his 50s with neatly combed silver hair, sharp suits, and a smile that could charm voters while hiding the ruthless ambition that insiders whispered about. And Harris's gut tightened because Victor had always played both sides of the law, donating to police charities while whispering promises into the ears of businessmen with shady backgrounds. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Daniel fought to remain awake despite the painkillers, his battered body yearning for rest, but his mind burning with the urgency of truth. And Emily, sitting beside him, noticed how his once strong and unshakable presence now seemed fragile, yet fiercer. His blue eyes clouded with pain, but ignited with determination. And when she softly asked, "Why would they do this to you?" Daniel rasped through swollen lips, "Because I saw too much. Marcus warned me. The shipment's under the bridge, Emily. They're moving something. And it's not just drugs, it's bigger." His voice breaking before the nurse rushed in to check his vitals, leaving Emily shaken because she realized her husband was not just the victim of a violent act, but a witness to a hidden empire festering beneath the town's surface. Back at the precinct, Harris decided to test the waters carefully, sharing only fragments of their findings with a handful of officers. And when one of them, a young rookie named Tyler Briggs, with sandy blonde hair, nervous eyes, and a habit of chewing his lip when anxious, reacted with barely concealed panic upon hearing the mention of the textile factory, Harris knew they had touched a nerve. And later that night, as he drove home with Coda in the back seat, headlights carving through the mist, Harris noticed a black SUV tailing him for several blocks, its tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. And when he deliberately changed routes, the SUV followed until Coda began barking furiously, his teeth flashing white in the rearview mirror. And Harris, a man not easily rattled, felt the cold weight of danger settle against his spine, for this was confirmation that eyes were on him, watching, waiting for him to slip. The following day, Carla and James accompanied Harris to the old textile factory under the guise of a routine patrol, the building looming like a corpse against the skyline, windows shattered, walls stained by fire and time. But as they circled the property, Coda suddenly stiffened, nose pressed to the wind, before dragging them toward a side entrance where the faint scent of diesel and sweat lingered. And though the door was chained, they pried it open just enough for Coda to slip inside, his nails clicking against the concrete floor as he sniffed, growled, and then barked once sharply, the sound reverberating in the hollow space. When Harris and Carla followed, flashlights slicing through the gloom, their beams illuminated rows of wooden crates stacked neatly, far too orderly for a ruin, each marked with false labels like agricultural supplies, yet reeking faintly of chemicals. And when James pried one open beneath the hay padding, they found black duffel bags filled with unmarked vials of liquid and stacks of cash, the unmistakable hallmarks of an operation far larger than small-town drug runners, an operation with funding, infrastructure, and political protection. Harris swore under his breath, snapping photos for evidence, but before they could search further, Coda's growl warned them of danger, and moments later, the distant rumble of engines reached their ears, forcing them to flee out the back as 3 trucks pulled into the lot, headlights sweeping across the building, and Harris crouched behind rusted machinery, with Carla, James, and Coda pressed close, watched as men in dark jackets and caps unloaded more crates, their movements efficient, professional, and guarded by armed lookouts, whose walk and posture screamed of prior military training. And as Harris's heart pounded, with the realization of what they were up against, Coda pressed against his leg, eyes gleaming in the night as if to say, "I'll protect you." And Harris knew then that their investigation had crossed into enemy territory, where one misstep could mean not only their deaths, but the unraveling of the fragile truth Daniel had risked everything to reveal. Night descended over Glenwood like a shroud, the kind of night where the streets seemed emptier than usual, where the hum of insects and the whisper of wind in the trees felt like conspirators carrying secrets. And in that oppressive quiet, Sergeant Robert Harris sat at his worn oak desk, the lamplight casting shadows across his tired face as he sifted through photographs of the crates, the duffel bags, and the armed men at the textile factory, each image a puzzle piece pointing toward an operation that was not just criminal, but systemic, one that required resources, cover, and allies at the highest levels. And as Harris rubbed his temple, Coda lay stretched across the office floor, eyes open and unblinking, ears twitching at every creak of the old building, his protective instincts heightened by the tension that thickened the air, like smoke before a fire. Meanwhile, Daniel Cole struggled against both pain and sedation at the hospital, his body weak, but his spirit refusing to yield. And Emily, who had not left his side, smoothed the sweat-damp hair from his forehead, her tall figure bent with exhaustion, but her green eyes glowing with determination as she whispered, "You just hold on, Daniel. We'll make them pay." And Lily, curled in the corner chair, with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, drifted between sleep and wakefulness, dreaming of her father standing tall and unbroken, even as reality painted him fragile and scarred. Elsewhere, Detective Carla Ruiz parked her unmarked sedan on a hill overlooking the councilman's estate, her short black hair pulled into a ponytail, her dark eyes narrowed as she studied the mansion glowing under expensive floodlights, a fortress of glass and stone surrounded by iron gates, where Councilman Victor Grant hosted a gathering of suited men and women. Their laughter carried faintly on the breeze, a sound that mocked her as she sat in the shadows, recording license plates, recognizing several belonging not just to local officials, but to corporate vehicles connected to the shell company that owned the textile factory, and her mind churned with fury at the brazenness of corruption that dressed itself in wealth and respectability. At the same time, Officer James Porter combed through financial records late into the night at his modest apartment, his broad frame hunched over a laptop as he traced wire transfers routed through offshore accounts, each transaction like a breadcrumb leading back to the same nexus of names, Grant's among them, and James's calm demeanor gave way to clenched fists as he realized their small town was just one spoke in a wheel that spun far wider, a wheel greased by money, power, and blood. By midnight, the three met again at Harris's home, the safest place left since the precinct itself felt compromised, and Emily joined them, her presence no longer that of a worried wife, but of a woman who had transformed into an ally, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, her voice steady as she demanded to know what was happening. And though Harris hesitated, Daniel's earlier plea echoed in his ears. So he told her the truth in measured words, explaining that Daniel had uncovered shipments of something dangerous, that Marcus Hale had likely been silenced for the same reason, and that the bridge had been chosen not just as a hiding place, but as a staging ground for moving contraband into the river's current, where boats ferried it downstream, away from prying eyes. Emily's lips trembled, but she did not cry. Instead, she said fiercely, "Then we fight back. All of us." And Coda, sensing her conviction, thumped his tail once against the floor, as though in agreement. Harris laid out their plan, to gather undeniable evidence, to infiltrate the factory and document the shipments with enough detail to expose the network publicly, bypassing the compromised channels of the department. But they all knew the risk, that stepping into the lion's den without backup was tantamount to a death sentence, and yet none of them flinched, because the alternative, silence, meant surrendering their town to corruption. The following evening, under a moon veiled by clouds, Harris, Carla, James, and Coda returned to the textile factory, dressed in black, their flashlights covered, their movements careful and deliberate, and as they slipped through the side entrance Coda had found before, the air inside was colder, thicker, humming with the sense of being watched, but the space appeared empty save for the looming crates stacked higher than before, evidence of the operation accelerating, and Harris felt the urgency sharpen within him. They moved quickly, Carla photographing every label, James collecting samples from the vials, Harris scanning documents left carelessly on a table, while Coda prowled ahead, nose to the ground, until suddenly his ears shot forward, and he growled, low and guttural, just as headlights flared through the grimy windows, and the sound of engines roared closer. Panic surged, but Harris gestured for silence, and they ducked behind a wall of crates as voices filled the factory, men barking orders, the clatter of boots echoing across concrete, and from their hiding place, the team watched as half a dozen figures in tactical gear entered, their faces shadowed by caps, their movements disciplined like soldiers, unloading more duffel bags from a truck, while one man, tall and lean with a scar slashing across his cheek, barked commands in a voice that carried authority, and Harris recognized him instantly. Detective Carl Denton, one of their own, a man with a clean-shaven face, a reputation for ambition, and a career fast-tracked by his political ties, now revealed as part of the conspiracy. The betrayal cut deep, and Harris's heart pounded with rage, but before he could act, Coda's growl slipped too loudly into the cavernous room, drawing Denton's sharp gaze toward the crates, and with a shout, the armed men advanced, weapons raised, forcing Harris and his team into motion, sprinting through the shadows as bullets ripped through wood, splinters raining down, Coda lunging ahead like a guardian angel made flesh, barking ferociously to draw fire away from his humans. Chaos erupted, the factory alive with gunfire and shouts, and as Harris and Carla fired back, James pulled open a side door, yelling for them to move, and they stumbled into the night, hearts pounding, breaths ragged, Coda bounding beside them unscathed but bristling with adrenaline. They piled into the unmarked sedan, tires screeching as Harris floored the accelerator, the factory shrinking behind them as Denton's men poured out in pursuit, headlights slicing through darkness, engines snarling like predators closing in, and in that desperate chase through winding rural roads, it was Coda who saved them, his sharp barks warning Harris of an SUV cutting them off ahead, allowing Harris to swerve just in time, sending the pursuer crashing into a ditch while the others fell behind. And only when they reached the safety of the hills did they stop, hearts still hammering, the reality settling upon them that the enemy was no longer hidden in shadows, but standing openly against them, armed, organized, and unafraid, and Harris, gripping the wheel with white knuckles, swore aloud, "This ends now," while Coda sat upright in the back seat, chest heaving, amber eyes burning with a fierce light that mirrored the determination of every human in that car. The morning after their harrowing escape, Glenwood awoke as though nothing had happened. Townsfolk sipping coffee at the diner, children hurrying to school, traffic humming along Main Street. Yet beneath that thin layer of normalcy, a storm raged unseen. For Sergeant Robert Harris, Detective Carla Ruiz, Officer James Porter, and the loyal K-9 Coda now carried evidence that tied Councilman Victor Grant and Detective Carl Denton to an operation far beyond their small town. And as Harris spread the photos, documents, and vials across his kitchen table, the weary lines on his face deepened, knowing full well that going public without airtight proof would be suicide, because the network would discredit them, bury them, or worse, silence them like they had tried with Daniel and Marcus. Emily Cole sat nearby, her chestnut hair disheveled, her green eyes fixed with unwavering resolve as she asked, "What if we go higher?" Outside Glenwood, someone who can't be bought, and Harris, though skeptical after years of watching justice corrupted, admitted she was right. This fight was bigger than them, and they needed allies who hadn't been poisoned by local politics. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Daniel Cole's recovery was slow but steady, his bruised face gaunt, yet his spirit unbroken. And when Harris visited him that afternoon with Coda at his side, the German shepherd leapt onto the bed, licking Daniel's hand with fervent devotion, making the battered officer's blue eyes shine with tears as he whispered, "You saved me, boy," before turning to Harris and rasping, "They won't stop, you know. Not until we're gone, or silenced," words that carried the gravity of a man who had stared into the abyss and returned with scars. Harris clasped Daniel's shoulder, replying, "Then we make damn sure we finish this before they finish us," a vow that bound them tighter than any oath, and with Emily's consent, they began funneling their evidence through encrypted channels to a federal contact Carla trusted, Special Agent Rebecca Navarro, a woman in her late 30s with striking auburn hair, fair skin, sharp hazel eyes, and a reputation for dismantling organized crime rings with a blend of intelligence and ferocity that had earned her respect and enemies in equal measure. And when she arrived in Glenwood under the guise of a Department of Agriculture inspector, her crisp navy suit and calm confidence contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding the local investigation. Yet when she sat across Harris, Carla, James, Emily, Daniel, and Coda, her expression hardened as she flipped through the evidence, muttering, "This isn't just contraband. This is chemical weapons-grade material. If this pipeline reaches the wrong buyers, it won't just be Glenwood that suffers, it'll be half the country." A revelation that chilled them all, because the crates beneath the bridge were not merely tools of corruption, but instruments of mass destruction. Navarro quickly devised a plan. They would infiltrate the next scheduled shipment, record the transaction, and capture Denton and Grant in the act. But it required bait, someone inside the circle, to draw the operation into motion, and though Harris volunteered, it was Daniel, still weak but burning with determination, who insisted, "They already tried to bury me. Let me be the one to smoke them out." His jaw set, his battered body a testament to resilience, and Emily's protest died on her lips when she saw the steel in her husband's eyes, realizing nothing could sway him. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. James setting up hidden cameras and trackers, Carla crafting cover stories, Navarro pulling federal strings for backup that would remain in the shadows until the trap was sprung, and through it all, Coda trained tirelessly, rehearsing maneuvers with Harris, his lean frame cutting through obstacles with precision, his amber eyes locked onto his handler as if understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. When the night came, heavy clouds smothered the stars, and at the textile factory, the hum of diesel engines announced the arrival of the shipment, trucks rolling in under the watchful eyes of Denton's men, crates hauled like clockwork, while Daniel, wired with a microphone, limped into the open under the guise of a compromised officer, ready to negotiate, his uniform still bearing scars from his ordeal, his face pale, but his gaze unyielding. Denton emerged from the shadows, scarred cheek glistening under floodlights, his smirk dripping with mockery as he drawled, "Didn't expect to see you walking after our little farewell under the bridge." And Daniel's voice, steady despite his pounding heart, replied, "You underestimated me, Carl. And my dog." At which point Coda growled from his hiding spot, every muscle coiled like a spring. As the tension mounted, Councilman Grant appeared, immaculate in a tailored gray suit, silver hair glinting, his smile that of a predator who believed himself untouchable. And he declared smoothly, "All this fuss for loyalty, Officer Cole. You could have been rich, powerful. Instead, you chose to be a martyr." But Daniel shot back, "I chose to be a cop, not a criminal." Words that rang with such conviction that even some of the armed men shifted uneasily. The deal commenced. Duffel bags of money, traded for crates of vials. But Navarro's hidden earpiece crackled with confirmation. The evidence was locked, transmissions secure, backup inbound, and just as victory seemed within reach, Denton's sharp eyes caught the glint of a hidden camera lens in the corner, and his roar of fury shattered the fragile charade. "It's a setup!" Guns raised instantly, shouts erupting, bullets tearing through crates, chemicals spilling in acrid smoke, and chaos exploded as Harris, Carla, James, and Navarro stormed in with weapons drawn, Coda launching like a missile, teeth sinking into Denton's arm as the traitorous detective screamed, his gun clattering to the floor. Emily, hidden nearby to witness, screamed Daniel's name as he dove for cover, and Grant, realizing the tide had turned, bolted toward a waiting SUV, his arrogance crumbling as Navarro pursued, exchanging gunfire that lit the night like lightning. The factory became a war zone, flames licking at the spilled chemicals, the air choking with fumes, and through the chaos, Coda never faltered, dragging Daniel out of the line of fire when a bullet whistled too close, his body shielding his handler with a loyalty so fierce it defied comprehension. And when Denton, bloodied but desperate, pulled a hidden blade, lunging at Harris, it was Coda who intercepted, slamming him to the ground, his growls vibrating with primal fury until Harris yanked the traitor's hands into cuffs. Outside, Navarro's agents finally swarmed in, black SUVs and flashing lights overwhelming the conspirators. Grant dragged out in shackles, his polished image reduced to nothing under the harsh glare of justice. And as dawn broke, painting the sky with the first light of triumph, Harris stood among his team, chest heaving, smoke rising from the ruins, Daniel leaning against Emily with Lily clutching his hand, and Coda, chest rising and falling, muzzle streaked with dirt and sweat, stood at the center of it all, like the hero he was, the silent guardian whose courage had turned the tide of a war no one else had seen coming. The aftermath of the raid left Glenwood trembling between relief and disbelief. For though Councilman Victor Grant and Detective Carl Denton had been arrested alongside a dozen of their armed conspirators, the sight of federal agents swarming the textile factory, the smoke still rising from charred crates, and the acrid tang of chemical residue lingering in the air, painted a grim reminder that evil had not only existed in their town, but had thrived in plain sight, shielded by power and polished smiles. In the following days, newspapers across the state plastered headlines about the bridge conspiracy. Townsfolk gathered in coffee shops, whispering about how close they had come to disaster. And in living rooms, mothers hugged their children tighter, realizing how much they owed to one battered officer and his dog who refused to give up. Daniel Cole, though still weak, stood tall at the courthouse steps. The morning after Grant's arraignment, his uniform pressed, though his face still bore faint bruises, and beside him, Emily, in a modest blue dress, chestnut hair gleaming in the sunlight, held Lily's hand as the girl clutched her stuffed rabbit, their little family framed by cameras and microphones. Yet Daniel's voice carried not pride, but humility when he declared, "This wasn't about me. It was about every officer who puts on this uniform with the promise to protect, even when betrayal comes from within. And it was about loyalty stronger than fear, the loyalty of a dog who saved my life." As he spoke, Coda sat at his side, regal and alert, his sable coat catching the morning light, his amber eyes scanning the crowd. Not with vanity, but with vigilance, the embodiment of courage without ego. And when Lily knelt to hug his neck, reporters' cameras flashed, capturing the innocence of a child who knew that her father had come home only because this four-legged guardian had refused to let him be taken. Yet beyond the applause and headlines, the deeper truth emerged in quiet moments. When Daniel lay awake at night, replaying the hours beneath the bridge, the ropes biting into his flesh, the water roaring below promising death. He often felt his breath catch until Coda padded onto the bed, pressing his weight against his handler's chest, grounding him in the present. When Emily, strong though she was, allowed herself to cry in the shower where no one could see, she remembered the image of Coda dragging Daniel to safety under gunfire, and her tears turned from despair to gratitude. When Harris visited Marcus Hale's grieving parents to tell them their son's ID had led them to the truth, the old couple wept, but their grief softened with pride, knowing that Marcus's courage had not been erased, and Harris, his weathered face damp with his own tears, silently vowed to etch Marcus's name into the memory of the department. Detective Carla Ruiz, standing on her porch in the quiet evening, allowed herself a rare smile, knowing that for once justice had not been bought, while James Porter took long walks at dawn, reminding himself that vigilance was not paranoia, but duty. And Special Agent Rebecca Navarro, though already called away to her next case, left behind a letter to Daniel's family, praising their strength and ending with the line, "Heroes do not always wear stars or carry guns. Sometimes they walk on four legs and speak only with their hearts," words that Emily framed on the wall above the fireplace. Weeks later, the town organized a ceremony beneath the very bridge where darkness had nearly claimed Daniel, the air filled with the scent of blooming spring flowers, the river rushing with a sound less ominous now, and townsfolk gathered shoulder to shoulder, children waving small flags, veterans saluting, officers standing in solemn rows. On a makeshift stage, Harris, his voice gravelly with emotion, presented Coda with a medal engraved with the words, "For unwavering loyalty and bravery." And as he pinned it to the dog's harness, the crowd erupted in applause, cheers echoing off the stone supports, tears streaming down faces hardened by life, yet softened by the undeniable truth that this animal had embodied the very best of humanity. Daniel knelt beside Coda, his hand trembling as he stroked the shepherd's fur, whispering words only the dog could hear, while Emily wiped her cheeks openly and Lily squealed with pride, clapping as though the world had no greater hero. And when the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Daniel lingered by the river, staring at the water that had once seemed like his tomb, but now sparkled under the sunlight, and he thought of Marcus, of betrayal, of corruption that still lurked beyond Glenwood's borders. But then he looked down at Coda leaning against his leg, tail swishing slowly, eyes steady and warm, and for the first time in weeks he allowed himself to believe that healing was possible, that broken trust could be mended, that courage would always rise again. The truth behind it all, the missing officer tied beneath the bridge, the corruption rooted in power, the battles fought in shadows, was that it could have ended in tragedy. It could have left Glenwood drowning in grief, but instead it became a testament to the bond between man and dog, to loyalty that refused to surrender. And it was that truth, raw and shining, that made the story not just one of survival, but one that would forever make hearts tremble with both sorrow and awe. For in the end, the bridge did not become a grave, but a monument to courage, and the tears shed, there were not of loss, but of gratitude, the kind that remind us that heroes sometimes walk beside us, on four paws, silent but steadfast, carrying the weight of love heavier than any chain.